Hi, and welcome to this episode of Powerful Testimonies. I'm excited about my guest today. Her name is Ibukun, and I have not heard her testimony. So typically, I kind of have an idea of what my guest is going to talk about and what they're going to teach us. So I'm hearing it for the first time with you guys. So Ibukun, thank you so much for joining, and we can't wait to hear what God has done in your life.
Thanks for having me, Kimberly. Super honored to be a guest on your podcast. And I'm looking forward to sharing my testimony and hoping that it touches, even if it's just one person, and inspires them and just shows them how amazing God is. I feel like I would have done an amazing thing. So, yeah.
And so over to you. What happened?
Okay, so I think just in terms of like career progression and just looking for work and like being, like applying to jobs and not knowing whether you'll hear back. Like this was about, I want to say, like 7 years ago now. I had graduated university and was looking for a role that like I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do career wise, but I was like, I at least need a job because I have bills to pay and somebody got to pay them. And so I was just like, all right, let me just like, go through an agency because I feel like they're more well versed in like looking for positions for people. And I just wanted to like just get into the workforce and figure out what that looked like. And so I did get a job with the Ministry of Health. And I was there for about a year. And with the way like the government works, you can be in a position for a long time, but somebody owns the position. So this is somebody's home position and they can go off on secondment, which means that they can move to a different ministry and work for them. And if that ministry decides to make them permanent, and then they would have to release the permanent position that they are currently holding. So it was one of those setups where I got the job that somebody owned, but the person was away on secondment. And so I was there for a year. I learned what needed to be done. I got pretty good at it, if I do say so myself. Everyone seemed to like me. I worked well with the manager. Everything was going well. And it was my first like big corporate sort of like adult job. So I was super excited. And then it gets to the point where I have to now interview for the role because it became open, which means that the person who owned the position had to let it go. And then that way they can't hold two permanent positions at once. And so I had to compete for my job.
Okay, so you were not interviewing for a job that you were already doing.
Yeah, pretty much. That's that. So it was such a weird concept to me because that's not how I've ever imagined it worked. But yes, I was already doing this job and I was told that the panel would consist of my manager, who again already knows what I do, but I would have to pretend like I've never met her a day in my life and explain everything and just prove how I am the qualified or most qualified candidate for the job. And so I went and I sat down at the computer. There was a pre-interview assessment, so it was pretty simple. There was two different ones. I was like, I read it and I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly how to respond to this, no biggie. And I know it obviously doesn't weigh as much as the interview questions, but again, with the government, sometimes they'll give you the questions beforehand. And so I think I got the questions an hour before the interview, but I was still feeling really good about it. And so I was like, okay, instead of focusing on the questions, I already know how I'm going to answer those. I'm going to focus on the assessments. So I did the first one and they were like, oh, make sure you save it under this title with your name and your, I don't know, interview, your job ID number, whatever, and then save that and then move on to the second one and then save that one as well. So somehow it was, again, I don't know how it happened, but I ended up like not saving the first one or saving the second one as the first one, but somehow I lost the first assessment and I only had the second one. So this is me being like, I'm already nervous. My interview date or my interview time got changed twice, and now I've lost one assessment. While I know it's not weighing like super heavily, again, it would have given me extra points because like I said, I already knew what to answer. So that was that. So after the interview, I was like, okay, well, I did the best I could. Let's see what happens. Again, I'm like, okay, I may not have answered all the questions properly, but I feel like with the fact that my manager, I think, likes me and everything seems to be going well, I'm just gonna like hope that, that'll count for something. So I left the interview and that was that. And then obviously a few weeks later, time to get the results, she calls me into her office. She's like, well, I think you did pretty well on the interview. In fact, like you answered, I think like the third to the fifth questions, you got the highest points because like nobody has ever answered it with that much detail. And I think you did a really, really good job. But the beginning was a bit sketchy. And also we only saw one of your assessments. Obviously, I already knew everything. And I was just like, okay, cool. So what does that mean? She's like, yeah, so unfortunately, I know. So she's like, unfortunately, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we unfortunately found a candidate who scored higher than you and you came second. But you're no longer the top candidate and you have to pretty much just like find another job. And so I was like, okay. So at this point, I was like, God, like I did everything. I tried my best. I prepared. I stayed up late. I like, why? Like, I was hoping that I'd done my part and God, you would do the rest. And, all of those things that you say to yourself. And so I was just like, okay, well, like, I mean, I didn't get it. So, and at this point, I hadn't been applying to other jobs. Again, I think that overconfidence bit me in the butt because I thought I've been in this role. Like, why would I? And I also, it was my first corporate job. So I felt like if I was applying to other jobs, again, they might call my current manager for a reference. And then it'd be like, oh, doesn't she want this job? Maybe she doesn't like us. Maybe. So I just had all these things in my head. And I realized the corporate world is a cutthroat world and nobody really cares about your feelings or how much you like a place and want to stay there. It's about like what's on paper. Somebody scored higher on the interview, they get the interview or the job. There's no sentiment, there's nothing. So I was like, all right, cool. So I hadn't been applying for any other jobs, but I think based on the relationships that I had formed, which I think is such a big thing, it's a big deal for me to just connect with people, no matter what it is that we have in common, and just like form that rapport, because it definitely comes in handy when you're looking for favors and stuff. So without even asking, this other executive assistant that I'd worked with was like, oh, I'm so sad you didn't get it. I was so sure you were a shoo-in, all this stuff. She's like, okay, how can I help you? Send me your resume. Another manager, like literally people were like seeking me out. Send me your resume. And like, I know this person's hiring. Another manager reached out to me from a different ministry. She's like, hey, like somebody told me about it. So like everyone was literally, and I was just like, okay, what's happening? Like it was almost like overwhelming. So I was just like doing what I could, like set my resume, did. And I did, like I hadn't started applying. At that point, it was too late to apply because I was like, if I don't get this job, then I have to go back to the agency, get them to find me a new role. And then like I really wanted to stay in the Ontario Public Service in the OPS at the time. So I was just like, okay, let me just pray and hope that one of these leads will work out. And so eventually somebody came back to me. She's like, hey, like I know this other EA who used to work for us, and we still have like a little email group chat thing that we send, job offers and job like ads to. And so there's this one person she knows is hiring. He's an assistant deputy minister. He's looking for like an administrative coordinator and scheduler. And like, it'd be like I can't remember how many levels. It was a completely different union, which was the better union at the time. And it was like the salary upgrade was like huge. And it was just like, I couldn't believe that I was even being considered for such an offer. So I was just like, okay, like I'm gonna just go have a coffee chat with the executive assistant and just try my best.
Now you've got me worried because I'm like, oh my goodness, she's got to do that interview, and what is she gonna do?
So the way it happened was like, I think they needed to fill the position so quickly. So it literally was a coffee chat. It was not an interview by any means. And I didn't really know what to expect going in, but I literally met her at Second Cup. I'll never forget. And it was a Friday. She was in jeans, like a denim dress, like super casual, almost like I was meeting a friend for coffee. And she's just like, hey, like, I heard about you, blah, blah, blah. We have this position, we need somebody to start right away. This is what the ministry does. It was the Ministry of Infrastructure. I didn't even know it was a ministry before I had this chat with her. And I was just like, okay, so what do they do? What does that mean? Okay, cool. What kind of things would I be doing? Who's my boss? And I just was trying to ask as many questions as I could to make sure I'd be a good fit and that I'd actually like working there, right? So I was like, okay, so she seems to be nice. And she's like, yeah, like, I came in as well not knowing the ministry existed, but it's a pretty small / newish ministry. We're still figuring things out. So it's a good time to kind of come in and make your mark and like, make a name for yourself. And she just kind of made it sound very appealing. So I was like, all right, cool. So I was thinking she'd be like, all right, we'd like to schedule you for an interview. And I just kind of went back home being like, okay, God, like I've done my part. I'm waiting to see what happens and what comes up from this. And I was literally waiting for an interview to be like, hey, come for your interview and so date. And she's just like, okay, so yeah, we chatted and it was lovely meeting you. We'd like to offer you the position. And I was just like, wait, what? Huh? I read that email no less than 10 times because I was just like, what do you mean? Like I didn't apply for this job. Like I was just like, okay, God, like it had to be you because like, huh? And so, yeah, it was just like so amazing. I remember being so happy because I was at home, obviously, because that other job had ended and I was at home. This was maybe 3 days after that job ended. So I wasn't even home for up to a week. And then this new job was starting on Monday.
Better job.
I was like, okay, God, I see you. This is like me being like, okay, in my human element, I'm like worried, I'm scared. I'm like, what's next? Maybe I should have done this. I should have done that. Maybe. And I was just like, honestly, like when God wants to do something, he's going to do it. He's going to show you like, this was not your doing. This was me. Favor, mercy, grace, all the things you don't deserve, but because I love you and you're my child, I'm going to show you that like I've got your back. I didn't ever think that I would ever be considered for such a role in the assistant deputy minister's office, being like, what, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like a fish out of water, but somehow like I got along great with my
somehow
boss.
You're swimming.
I'm swimming. And like my boss that I worked with back then, he recently retired. So it was almost like a full circle moment because I went to his retirement party and I was like, I remember the first time I met you. This whole thing just goes to show me like, yeah, God is just amazing. Even when you least expect it, when you're worried, when you're scared, you don't know what the future holds. It just reminds us to like put your trust in God. My favorite Bible verse is Proverbs 3:5-6, which says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and in all your ways submit to him and he will make your path straight. And that he does and always does and consistently does. And all that's left for us to do is just to continue to form and build that relationship with him. Listening.
Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
And it's a lesson that people always need to hear in those moments where you're unsure, where you're nervous. Just pray about it, and God has never left you, and
Sure.
show up for you. So thank you for sharing that. Everyone else, have a beautiful, blessed week, and thank you for joining. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please send me a message, DM, whatever it is. We would love to hear your story. Be blessed. Thank you.